Hundreds of thousands of people in France have taken part in fresh protests and strikes against pension reforms. It's the 10th day of nationwide action since mid-January. While most demonstrated peacefully, there were clashes with police in several major cities. President Emmanuel Macron has refused to back down on his decision to increase the retirement age to 64.
Nearly 2 weeks after President Macron pushed the changes through Parliament, public fury shows no sign of abating. 740,000 people marched across the country on Tuesday, the government said. In the western city of Nantes, the barricades burned. "It's we who work, it's we who decide," reads the banner. In the south, thousands marched on the old port of Marseille. While in Paris, protesters marched through the city centre, led by the unions. Everyone hates the police, they chanted, though the march remained relatively peaceful. But elsewhere in the capital, violence erupted between black-clad protesters and riot police, who reacted to stones and projectiles with tear gas. Protesters dismissed criticism that the French retirement age is one of the world's lowest.
It's not because it's worse in other countries that we should do the same, because we know that the working and living conditions in these countries are awful for poor people, that some people reach an age where they should have the right to rest, and they have to work 2-3 jobs in very poor social conditions with very little rights. And we don't want that in France.
So much for the workers who work with their arms and their position, and we are sorry for the other countries. They must fight as we fight.
Striking Parisian railway workers echoed that sentiment.
They want to turn our 2 best years of retirement into the worst 2 years of our working lives. We're all going to be broken.
The increasing tendency towards violence prompted the deployment of 13,000 officers, according to Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin. But the simmering outrage does not seem to have dissuaded Macron from pushing through his changes. The president was given a boost by the decision of Parisian sanitation workers to return to work after a 3-week strike, perhaps a sign that the protests could burn themselves out.
A 10th day of nationwide protests against these pension reforms. DW's Lisa Lewis in Paris told me how this one compared to previous protests.
Well, when you look at the number of protesters, that number has gone down slightly from the record day last week. There were between 700,000 to 2 million people out in the streets across France, compared to last week's 1.5 million up to 3 million. These figures obviously coming from the police or the unions. Also, not the number of people taking part in sector strikes seems to have gone down. But mind you, as you said, this movement does not seem to be over just yet, because there are still hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets demonstrating, whereas, as you said, the reform has already gone through Parliament. The government pushed the reform through. And up next, legally speaking, is the decision by the Constitutional Council to see if the reform is constitutional indeed. So people seem to be waiting at least for that.
The French Prime Minister has now invited union leaders to discuss this pension reform, which has already been pushed through Parliament. You said it there. So what could a solution look like?
Well, that was obviously quite surprising, because the French Prime Minister, the government, has not talked to the unions for about 2.5 months. The unions were asking for that, for a talk, but the government didn't seem to want to talk to them. Now the unions are saying, we're going to go there, we're going to talk to the government, but what we want to speak about is really this pension reform. We want the government to drop the reform. However, the government seems not really willing to do so. They are talking about, taking things forward when it comes to work relations, to other things, other reforms. And if that's the case, if the government does not really move when it comes to the pension reform, this round of discussions will not provide any tangible result. And the unions have already said that they would keep on demonstrating afterwards.
Yeah, months of protests now. What effect are they having on life in France, on your day-to-day life? We don't have much time, but I do want to ask you this.
Well, as you know, waste collectors have been striking here in Paris, so waste is piling up on the sidewalks in certain areas of Paris. However, they've now interrupted their strike, so that will be collected in the coming days, but they're saying that they could go on strike later on again. There's also some disruption in the transport sector. When you take the train, your train might be cancelled. And when it comes to the refineries, some refineries are being blocked, and certain fuel stations are running out of fuel. So there is still a certain amount of disruption in daily life here in France.
DW's Lisa Lewis joining us this morning from Paris. Thank you.